Fat Girl was used as human bridge for horses. Mountain Man burned the bridge and said, "Walk on me." Instead, the spring sun beat down on Ironwood Ranch, but the stream that cut through the pasture ran cold as death. Face pressed into the water, wrists and ankles bound with wire, Prudence Ashworth lay stretched across the current. Her broad back groaned under the weight of horses as they clattered over her, wagon wheels grinding cruelly against her flesh. Silas Blackthorne, her adoptive father and master of the ranch, stood laughing on the bank. "Look at her," he jeered to the men gathered around. "Too fat to wed, too ugly to be seen, so I've put her to work. At last, that mountain of lard is good for something, a bridge for my stock." The men snorted, some in amusement, others in shame at the sight of her humiliation. Prudence, 37 years old, strong yet broken, tried to lift her head from the stream. "Please, Silas, I'll do as you ask. I'll marry whomever you choose. Just let me up." "Too late," Silas snapped, spitting into the water. "Your worth is measured now by how many hooves can cross your back." Each hoof struck like a hammer, and each jeer cut deeper than iron. By dusk, her body was trembling, her spirit ready to collapse into the current that threatened to swallow her. And then, from the line of trees, a shadow moved. Taller than any man she had ever seen, shoulders broad as a span of timber, hair silver as the river's spray. Colossus Cole Bridge Builder stepped into the clearing. The horses spooked at his presence, scattering up the bank. Cole's booming voice rolled like thunder across the stream. "Enough!" Every head turned. The giant knelt by Prudence, snapping the wire with one sweep of his hand. His words rang like judgment. "She is no bridge, she is human, and if any man here needs a bridge—" His gaze fixed on Silas. "Walk on me." The men of Ironwood Ranch had seen cruelty before, but none like this. Silas Blackthorne ruled his land with a whip in one hand and whiskey in the other, and those who worked for him knew better than to speak against him. Prudence Ashworth had lived beneath his roof since she was a child, a ward taken in for chores and obedience. But as her body grew broader and heavier, so too did the ridicule. She became the butt of every joke, the shameful secret Silas used to remind others of his power. By 37, Prue had known nothing but servitude and scorn. When Silas demanded she marry a wealthy old cattleman twice her age, she refused. It was the first time she had stood her ground. Silas's answer was simple: strip her of humanity, make her body a lesson. He bound her in wire, laid her across the stream, and named her the Bridge. Day after day, she bore hooves and wheels, her skin bruised, her spirit sinking into the mud. She whispered prayers at night, hoping God might send an angel or let the river sweep her away. But the one who came was no angel. He was a mountain of a man. Cole Bridge Builder had lived most of his 66 years in the wilderness. Taller than 3 men, shoulders like stone archways, hands broad enough to lift oxen, he was both feared and revered. They said he could raise a bridge in a day, carve a path where mountains barred the way. Yet Cole lived alone on Stone Arch Mountain, building not for fame, but for redemption. His wife and son had been swept away years before when a poorly built town bridge collapsed, a bridge he had refused to design. Since then, he had sworn his life to building only what could never fail. That afternoon, surveying the lowland streams for the county, he stumbled upon a sight that froze him where he stood: a woman used as a crossing. At first, his mind refused to accept it. Stone and timber were meant for spanning water, not flesh, not bone. Then fury lit within him, slow and hot as fire at the forge. He strode into the clearing. The horses shied, men gaped, and Silas spat. "What business have you here, giant?" Cole did not answer Silas. Instead, he knelt by Prue, eyes meeting hers. She expected pity, maybe disgust, but saw instead a steady warmth, as though her suffering was a weight he meant to shoulder. His massive hands tore through the binding wires as if they were twine. "Can you breathe?" he asked softly. Prue's lips trembled. Why would you help me?" "Because no soul deserves to be trodden underfoot," he replied, lifting her carefully into his arms. "You are not a bridge. You are a woman." Silas's face turned red. "She's mine, my ward, my property." Cole rose to his full height, Prue cradled like a child. His voice boomed across the ranch yard. "She belongs to no man, and if you need a bridge, Blackthorn, then here." He spread his arms wide, water streaming from his clothes. "Walk on me," the men whispered among themselves, caught between fear of their master and awe of the giant who dared defy him. That day marked a turning point. For Prue, it was the first time someone had stood for her. For Cole, it was the first time since tragedy had struck that he felt his strength was being used for salvation, not stone. The ranch hands had scattered like quail after Cole's challenge, none willing to test the resolve of the giant. Silas shouted curses from the bank, but he dared not follow when Cole carried Prudence into the trees. The sound of his threats soon faded, swallowed by the forest. Prue clung weakly to Cole's shirt, afraid her weight would crush even a man his size. "You should leave me," she whispered. "I'm too heavy, too much trouble. He'll come for you." Cole's stride never faltered. "I've carried bridges of stone heavier than you, Prudence, and I've carried grief heavier still. You are no burden." They crossed the creek, water foaming around his knees, and pressed into the wild country. Pine needles softened the earth underfoot. The air grew cleaner, sharper, as though each breath was washing the poison of Silas's ranch from her lungs. Still, shame clung to her like a second skin. By nightfall, Cole built a fire in a clearing. He set her down gently on a bed of spruce boughs he had gathered, then pulled bread and dried venison from his pack. She tried to eat, but every swallow was heavy with doubt. "Why do you help me?" she asked again, staring into the flames. Cole's eyes reflected the firelight, steady and grave. "Because I once failed to help. Years ago, a bridge collapsed in a storm. My wife and son were on it. Since that day, I swore I'd never let another soul be used as a span for cruelty or left to fall." Prue's heart ached. For years, she had believed herself cursed, punished for the shape of her body. To hear this man speak of loss greater than her own, yet still rise to protect her, it shook something loose inside her. The next morning, Cole carved a stout crutch from pine and showed her how to lean upon it. "Your body needs rest, but your spirit needs to move," he said. With his hand steadying hers, she took slow steps through the meadow. Each faltering stride was agony, yet Cole never let her fall. At midday, he carried her across a river on his shoulders. She tensed as the current swirled around them, memories of being bound in the stream clawing back at her. Cole's voice rumbled steady above the water. "Look to the far bank, not the current. Always look where you're going, not what you've left behind." She did as he said. When they reached the far shore, she realized her breath was steady, her fear eased. That night, he built a lean-to beneath a granite outcrop. As the fire warmed them, He handed her a steaming tin cup of broth he had brewed from wild herbs. The scent was earthy, calming. She sipped, and warmth spread through her, loosening knots of pain. "You think yourself weak," he said quietly, watching the flames dance. "But I saw you endure hooves and wheels and still breathe. That is not weakness, Prudence. That is strength forged in fire." Tears stung her eyes. No one had ever spoken of her with such respect. She turned her face away, ashamed of the hope rising within her. Days passed, and the wilderness became their world. Snow-capped ridges loomed above, rivers sang below, and always Cole walked beside her, silent but steady. He showed her how to find water by following deer tracks, how to set snares with willow twine, how to read the sky for storms. And slowly, Prudence began to feel something shift. Each step on her crutch was not just survival, but defiance. Each meal she cooked by the fire was proof she was more than Silas's bridge. One evening, as dusk painted the valley in violet, Cole pointed to the horizon, where a great stone arch stretched across a canyon. "Stone Arch," he said, "my home. You will be safe there." Prue followed his gaze, heart pounding. For the first time in her life, the word home did not mean servitude. It meant possibility. Stone Arch Mountain rose like a fortress of granite and pine, its slopes carved by rivers that thundered into the valley below. Nestled high among its cliffs stood Cole's home, a cabin of stone and timber that seemed part of the mountain itself. A narrow bridge of his own making arched across a gorge to reach it, strong enough to bear wagons, yet graceful as a song. When Cole carried Prudence across that bridge, her breath caught. Never had she seen such beauty. The arch soared over a chasm where a waterfall thundered, the spray turning the evening light into rainbows. Cole walked it as though it were nothing more than a garden path, his step sure, his shoulders steady beneath her. Inside, the cabin was simple but warm. Thick walls of stone, beams hewn from cedar, a hearth big enough to roast a stag. The scent of pine resin and wood smoke filled the air. Cole laid her gently on a bed piled with furs. "This is your place now," he said simply. At first, Prudence could not believe him. She half expected to be ordered to cook or clean, as she had always been at Silas's ranch. Instead, Cole busied himself with the fire, with stew simmering in a pot, with fetching water from the spring outside. He moved with the quiet rhythm of a man long accustomed to solitude, yet each gesture was for her. "You'll eat first," he said when the meal was ready. She blinked. "I should serve you." His voice was firm, though kind. "You will eat first." And so she did, tears slipping down her cheeks as she tasted meat and potatoes that were hot, seasoned, meant to nourish, not scraps tossed at her like feed for an animal. Days settled into a rhythm. Cole rose before dawn to tend his goats and chop wood. He never asked her to do more than she could, but when she insisted, he taught her. He guided her hands on the axe, steadying her swing until the log split clean. He showed her how to plant seeds in neat rows, how to patch a leak in the roof with pine tar, how to mend harness leather. Each lesson was given without impatience, and each success, however small, he acknowledged with a nod that made warmth bloom in her chest. Prudence, long told she was useless, began to see her hands differently. They were not clumsy. They were capable. When she swept the cabin, baked bread, or sewed new curtains from flour sacks, she did so with pride. The cabin was no longer just Cole's. It was theirs. In the evenings, after chores were done, they sat by the fire. Sometimes Cole read from his Bible, his deep voice steady and calm. Other times he spoke of bridges he had built across the land, stone arches that defied rivers, timber spans that linked valleys. He described each one not as an engineering feat, but as a story. A bridge for a widow to reach her fields, a bridge for children to cross safely to school. You see, he told her one night, a bridge is not just stone and timber, it is hope. It carries people where they could not go alone. She looked at him, heart aching. And what of me? I was used as a bridge to mock me. Cole leaned forward, his eyes fierce. No, you were used to break you. That is not the purpose of a bridge. You are meant to connect, not to be crushed. The words lodged deep within her, a truth she had never been allowed to believe. Slowly, shy affection grew. One evening, as snow fell thick outside, she bent to lay another log on the fire. Her hair tumbled loose, and Cole, without thinking, brushed it back from her face. His fingers lingered for a breath before he pulled away, his cheeks coloring. Another time, she stitched a new lining into his coat. When he tried it on, she fussed with the collar, her hand smoothing across his chest longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and silence filled the cabin, heavy with unspoken feeling. Yet Cole never pressed closer, never demanded. His restraint spoke louder than words. Respect, patience, a promise of choice. For Prudence, who had never known gentleness, it was both strange and wondrous. One night, as the firelight flickered across stone walls, she whispered, "You should have left me there. It would have been easier." Cole's gaze held hers. Easier, perhaps. But the Lord did not give me these hands to build bridges of stone alone. He gave them to carry souls, and I will carry you as far as you need. Her tears spilled freely then, not of shame, but of release. In that cabin, with the fire warm and the storm raging outside, she knew she had found not just refuge, but the beginnings of a life where she was more than Silas's bridge. She was a woman seen, valued, and cherished. Spring deepened into summer, and with it, Prudence's strength grew. She could walk farther each day with the stout staff Cole had carved for her. She planted beans and squash in the small garden patch behind the cabin. Her laugh, once stifled by shame, began to ring through the stone arches like music. Yet peace is never left unchallenged. One morning, as Cole and Prue repaired a fence near the goat pen, a rider appeared on the far ridge. He carried no banner, but Cole knew the silhouette, one of Silas Blackthorn's men. The figure wheeled his horse, disappearing down the slope, no doubt to carry word that Prue still lived. That night, Prue sat silent by the fire, hands twisting in her lap. "He will come for me," she whispered. "Silas will never forgive being defied. He'll bring more men." Cole set aside his tools. His eyes, usually steady, darkened. "Then let him come. Stone Arch is not ironwood. Here, the ground belongs to me, and so do the bridges. He'll find they do not fall so easily." But he could not hide the shadow that crossed his face. Days later, Prue pressed him. "Why do you fear bridges falling, Cole?" The giant stirred the fire, the flames etching lines of grief across his weathered face. "Because once I let one fall. A river bridge near Carson. I told the town it was unsafe, that the beams were rotten, but they built anyway. The night the storm came, I wasn't there. My wife and son were crossing." His voice caught, breaking like timber under strain. "The river took them. Since that night, I swore no one else would fall while I yet lived." Prue reached for his hand, her fingers small against his vast palm. "You could not have stopped the storm." "But I could have stood in its place," he murmured. "I could have been the bridge." His guilt was a scar deeper than any wound, but it bound them closer, for she too knew what it was to be defined by shame not her own. The threat arrived sooner than either expected. At dawn, hoofbeats thundered through the gorge. Silas himself rode at the front, flanked by a dozen armed men. Their torches lit the sky with malice. Cole stood at the cabin door, rifle across his chest. Prue joined him, gripping her staff, fear and resolve warring in her eyes. Silas's sneer was audible even from the far bank. "You think you can steal from me, giant? That fat sow belongs to me. She was my bridge, and she'll be my bridge again." Cole's voice roared back like thunder rolling through the canyon. "She is no man's bridge. She is no man's property. If you want her, you'll have to cross over me." The men muttered uneasily. None had forgotten how the giant had defied them at the stream, but Silas's pride burned hotter than fear. "Burn his cabin," he ordered. "Tear down his bridges. Drag her back if you must." Prue felt terror seize her chest, but then something steadier rose. She stepped forward, her voice carrying over the roar of the river. "I am not your bridge, Silas. I am not your shame. I am Prudence Ashworth, and this is my home." The words stunned even Cole. Never had he seen her stand so tall, her chin high, her body no longer bowed beneath insult. The men hesitated, caught between her courage and Cole's towering figure. But Silas was relentless. He spurred his horse toward the nearest bridge, torch in hand, intent on burning the span that led to Cole's domain. Cole's jaw tightened. "Then the mountain itself will decide." He lifted his rifle, not to kill, but to fire a warning shot into the sky. The crack echoed across the canyon, scattering birds, rattling the hearts of men. Yet Silas urged his horse forward, torch raised high. The battle for Stone Arch had begun. The torch in Silas's hand flared against the night wind as he pressed his horse onto the first stone span. Sparks rained down, threatening to lick the wooden braces. Behind him, his men shouted, urging one another forward, though none dared be the first to follow. Cole stepped onto the opposite side of the bridge, his frame blotting out the moonlight. The river thundered below, cold and merciless. His voice carried like rolling thunder. "Silas Blackthorn, turn back. This bridge was built to carry the weight of lives, not the burden of your cruelty." "Out of my way, freak," Silas spat, thrusting the torch forward. "She belongs to me. That fat cow was good for something at last, and I'll see her crawling in the mud again." Cole's jaw set hard. "Then you'll cross me first." He strode onto the bridge. Each footfall shook the stones. Prue, standing on the bank, wanted to cry out, to stop them both, but her voice caught. Instead, she clutched her staff tighter, heart pounding. Silas swung the torch wildly, aiming to strike Cole's chest. But the mountain man caught the burning brand in one great hand. The flames licked at his skin, searing flesh, but he did not flinch. With a twist, he hurled the torch into the river where the water swallowed it whole. A gasp rippled through the watching men. Silas, enraged, drew his pistol. The muzzle flared once, twice. The shots cracked sharp across the gorge. Cole staggered, a crimson streak blossoming across his shoulder, but still he advanced, each step like an avalanche, until his massive hand closed around Silas's bridle. "You built your kingdom on cruelty," Cole growled, wrenching the horse to a halt. but cruelty cannot stand against stone. He dragged Silas from the saddle, flinging him down onto the bridge. The man landed hard, breath knocked from his chest. Cole planted one colossal boot beside him. "Look below, Blackthorn. The river waits. That's where tyrants are washed away." Prue's voice, trembling yet strong, rose from the bank. "No, Cole, don't throw him. Let him see what mercy looks like, something he never gave me." Cole looked back at her. In her eyes he saw no fear, only the quiet power of a woman who had been broken and yet stood whole again. He lowered his hand. Silas scrambled to his knees, humiliated. His men, seeing him defeated and spared, turned their horses and fled into the night. None wished to follow a master bested not by violence, but by restraint. Cole hauled Silas to his feet and shoved him toward the far side. "Leave this valley. If you set foot near her again, you'll answer to me and the mountain itself." Silas stumbled away, his figure shrinking into the shadows. Cole turned, blood seeping from his wound, yet his gaze softened when it found Prue. She hurried to him, tears spilling, and pressed her hands to his arm. "You stood for me?" she whispered. "No," he rumbled, voice breaking. "We stood together." The bridge beneath them, once a battleground, now felt like holy ground. Snow began to fall as Cole and Prue made their way back across the valley. The night's violence lay behind them, but its echoes still clung to the air. Cole's arm was bound in linen now. The bleeding slowed, though each step carried the weight of exhaustion. Beside him, Prue steadied his stride with her staff, refusing to let him falter. When they reached the cabin, the hearth still smoldered. Prue stirred the embers back to life, coaxing flame from ash until warmth filled the room again. The firelight painted their faces in amber, softening the scars and shadows. Cole lowered himself into the chair by the hearth with a groan, his frame too large for the wooden seat, yet strangely at home there. Prue knelt at his side. "You could have ended him tonight," she said quietly. "Why didn't you?" Cole looked into the flames, voice low and weary. "Because I've carried enough ruin on these shoulders. Mercy builds bridges stronger than vengeance ever will." Silence lingered, broken only by the crackle of burning wood. Then, with trembling courage, Prue reached for his hand. His fingers, calloused and immense, curled around hers with surprising gentleness. "You saved me," she whispered. "But more than that, you saw me. No one has ever done that before." Cole's eyes met hers, steady and unyielding. "You are not a bridge, Prue. You are the beginning of one." She blinked at him, puzzled. "A beginning?" He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "A bridge between the life you endured and the life waiting for you." Tears welled in her eyes, yet they were not tears of pain. They sat together in the glow of the fire, hand in hand, the storm outside forgotten. And though neither spoke it aloud, one question hovered between them, fragile and fierce. Was this the first stone of a love strong enough to withstand the world? Every time I share a story like this, I'm reminded that strength is not only in muscle or stone, but in mercy, in standing for those the world calls unworthy. Prue's voice, once silenced, became her greatest bridge, and Cole, feared for his size, found his purpose in protecting rather than destroying. Wherever you're listening from, tell me in the comments, what bridges have you crossed in your own life? If you still believe that love can build something stronger than cruelty, stay with me. The next story will be waiting just for you.